welcome back to my channel. This is Kat here. As you know, I am working on a children's book called Use Your Voice, and I'm going to be self-publishing it. And in order to do that, I've had to attempt to get an idea of what's going on. So I thought it would be helpful to share kind of the basics of what I've learned about self-publishing with you guys. As a disclaimer, since I'm new to all this information, if you have any corrections, definitely just leave them in the comments below. All right, so I took some notes because I didn't want to forget anything, but basically this information is going to cover 7 different topics, from the industry to the players involved, as well as the details of self-publishing, like the different options you can pick from, as well as like the format, adding a barcode to it, uploading the book, and all of that. Like, I haven't gotten to the later stages of self-publishing, but I wanted to just touch on what I've read about so far, just so that it could be a high-level overview of the process. So let's get started. So first I want to start off by talking about the industry as a whole. Like in the past, there was this like exclusive inner circle of people in the book publishing industry, and there might still be probably, but you would have these big publishing houses that publish a lot of the popular books that we see in the bookstores today, but a new author like myself can't just go directly to the publishing house. You need to hire an agent, and then the agent will represent you to the publishing house. Now, in order to propose a new project, you need to write something like a query letter, which kind of talks about what your book is about to try to sell it. And then you just send it around to the different publishing houses, and then a lot of brand new authors get a lot of rejection letters. But finally, if someone is willing to invest in your book and take a risk on it, then you sign a book contract. That's a whole nother process of publishing with publishing companies. Luckily, though, with the rise of better technologies, now there's something called print-on-demand services, where there's these companies that basically you have your book on file, and then when a customer orders it, they'll dig up those files and print however many copies the customer needs, and then just ships it. So these printers are able to do very small quantities of books, which is great because then you don't need to hold a lot of inventory. It's really awesome because I don't think I would be able to become a children's book author otherwise. So thank you for technology. All right, let's move on to talking about the different players in this space. Now, there's a lot of different companies that have sprung up to kind of make the process easier for new authors to kind of navigate the self-publishing process. But there are a smaller subset of those companies are focused on actually self-publishing. Okay, so here are some of the self-publishing companies that I've heard of. There's Lulu, there's Blurb, there's Amazon CreateSpace, as well as IngramSpark. Now, I'm sure that there are other self-publishing companies, but these are just some of the more popular ones that I've heard over and over again. So for Lulu, you can see that you can create the book and then publish it, and there's different formats, whether it's paperback, hardcover, etc. And then you can see that if you have a certain book, what the royalty percentage would be if you sell on Lulu's website versus selling on other companies' websites like Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You would definitely get a lot lower royalty amount. So they do probably encourage you to sell on Lulu. Similarly, there's also Blurb, and this is pretty popular with people too, I think, where they publish different types of books. There's a cool matrix of like the different options that are provided. If you scroll down to distribution options, this is what I was interested in. You can sell your books through Blurb or your own website, but then if you want to get it to other distribution channels like Amazon or beyond, then it's not as supported. A children's book, I think, would be considered a photo book, so I didn't think that this was the right option for me. Next, we have CreateSpace, which is an Amazon company. So when people talk about self-publishing on Amazon, this is what they mean. It's free, so there's no upfront cost. And then they make it easy for you to distribute through the different Amazon sites. And then if you want to do expanded distribution to, bookstores and other places, though you do get lower royalties, but also it is harder to get into these channels. For example, I talked to some people who worked at local bookstores, and they were saying that if the book that I create is published by Amazon, or which is basically being published by CreateSpace, then they won't stock the book. Now, being published by Amazon is different from being distributed by Amazon. So anyways, I think it'll become clear if I go over to the next option. Ingram is like one of the largest global distributors of books. If you publish with IngramSpark, then you can get your book distributed to, all the bookstores like Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, as well as you can also put it on Amazon, and you can also distribute globally. Local bookstores that I talk to, like they get their books from Ingram. So they're okay with buying your book if you're a small author. If they can get it from Ingram, then they can order it into their store. So ultimately, that is why I decided to go with IngramSpark. And as you can see, there's a small upfront cost to uploading your book, but it's really not that much. And you can actually get some of this money back if you order enough books for the initial batch or something like that. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different options for self-publishing, and it really just depends on what factors are most important for you and how you're going to be selling your book. You also have to take into account the different cost of printing, because that will also affect your revenue. Once I decided that I was going to go with IngramSpark, I decided to dive into the different resources they have available for self-publishing. This last link here leads to a really useful guide. It's a monster of a document. It's their guide to independent publishing. It's like 100 pages long. And yeah, I did read it all, but I don't really remember most of it. Anyways, it talks about the different stages of preparing for publishing. One thing I want to call your attention to is the trim size matrix, which is really useful because it shows you what options are available. So on the left-hand side are the trim sizes, which is basically the width and height of the book. So you can go anywhere from a 4x6 book all the way down to like an 8x10 book. And then going across, well, you can see what type of binding is available for the book. You can choose whether it's going to be paperback, if it's going to be hardcover, and then if it's hardcover, whether it's going to have a jacket on it. In that case, then the actual book will be a cloth book with a jacket on top. You can also decide whether it's going to be black and white, which of course will be cheaper to print, or if you need color to be printed in your book, or if you want to even go a step further and do premium color. For the most part, you need a minimum of 18 pages. This matrix was definitely super overwhelming when I first saw it. Luckily, I did see on the IngramSpark webpage that they have this section called What the Average Children's Book Looks Like, and it just gives you the dimensions. I think this was really helpful in terms of anchoring down like what type of size I could aim for. The other thing that helped was just doing a Google search on how to select your trim size. Here's another website that talked about the popular children's book trim sizes, 8x10, 10x8, or square 8x8. One thing I do want to mention is that for IngramSpark, I think all the books are portraits, so you can't actually print a landscape book. I kind of had a hard time deciding on the specs for my book, but I needed to make decisions because in order to do the artwork, I needed to know the size of the book that I was working with. So I just looked at a bunch of the books that I had and then took my handy dandy ruler and just started measuring a lot of the books and just seeing like if the size of the book felt right. Just basically going off my gut and my instinct and kind of just like what I envisioned the book to be. I noticed that, this book, it's beautiful, but it's also really large. And for my audience, which is about like 2 to 3 years old, like this book might be a little too big. There's also these smaller Dr. Seuss books, but then this is portrait mode, and a lot of the drawings that I had been doing were square. I actually decided to go with a trim size of 8x8, which is this book here, but instead of paperback, it would be a hardcover book because for my audience, they're at that age where they might be chewing on the book, so I just want to make it more durable by having a hardcover book. Actually, for my audience, it would be ideal to create a board book, which I see in the bookstores for the really young kids because then the pages won't get ripped. But I haven't seen any self-publishing companies that self-publish board books. Maybe that's the new thing. Maybe someone should start that. Then I'll order from you. Once I decided on the dimensions and the spec of my book, then I moved on to figuring out the format of the book because I wasn't sure what format IngramSpark wanted my book in. Turns out they need 2 PDF files. One is a PDF of the interior of the book, so all the different pages. The second is a PDF of the front and back cover. So they use these 2 files to print the book, basically. There's detailed guides on their website on how to actually set up these PDFs. I opened the PDF checklist as well as the file creation guide. It talks about preparing the PDF for the interior of your book and then the PDF for your cover. This was kind of hard to understand because it uses all these terms that designers or book publishers know about, but I didn't. So I had to like Google a lot of these terms to figure out what they meant. There's also this file creation guide that talks in more detail than the checklist. For example, for a colored picture book, you need to follow these specifications. Two important things to notice are margins and bleed. So for margins, you don't want to put your important information so close to the edge of the page, otherwise it could get cut off. So they recommend staying within like half an inch away from the edge. And then bleed is this extra thing you need to take into account. If you want images that go like full edge to edge, like my book, you need to actually have enough artwork to extend beyond the edge of the screen. So for an 8 by 8 inch book, I actually need to create the artwork at a slightly larger size. So many details. This diagram was helpful because it shows how this blue area here is the margin where you don't want your content to be in. And then this little strip on the edges here are the bleed region. I think IngramSpark provides a tool to help you generate the cover file, but basically you need the back cover as well as the front cover art. And then also there's a spine here. If it's a thick enough book, then you might want to put the book title here too. I haven't even gotten close to looking at the cover part, so that'll be for later. I wanted to just briefly talk about the different tools that I'm using to make sure that it comes out right. One thing I noticed was that it wants the color files for the artwork to be as a CMYK image. That's different from RGB. For my research online, like the iPad, the apps there create images that have RGB colors instead of CMYK colors. And I think the difference is that the RGB colors are additive, which works for like a digital screen, but then when you're printing, you can't like print white. So I guess they use the CMYK color space. I don't know. This stuff makes my head hurt. But basically I just realized that all the images I was doing on the iPad for so many months would not come out in the right format. I did do a quick Google search to figure out how to save it in the right format. This staff person from Adobe was talking about how you have to bring the image into Photoshop or Illustrator to convert it. And so I was worried that the images that I was creating would just turn out differently on paper if I had to go through that conversion process. So, I was like, should I just make the jump to use Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop? But they don't have iPad apps, so I have to switch to a desktop. And so then I did research on like, what exactly is the difference between all these different tools and what do I need it for? This article kind of compares and contrasts the difference between Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and InDesign. IngramSpark was also talking about saving the files or generating it using InDesign. This is a really good article talking about how you use Illustrator for like images and Photoshop for like photos. And then if you're going to add text as well and kind of lay it out as part of like a brochure or you're going to print it, then you should use InDesign. I think what I'm going to need is a combination of Illustrator and InDesign. So what I'm basically saying is that I basically switched from using my iPad to using a desktop, and I went back to using my Wacom tablet. Okay, hang in there. There's still more. Okay, I'll try to breeze through this quickly. So on the back of every book, you'll notice that there's this ISBN number, which is a unique 13-digit code that identifies the book uniquely. There are a couple different ways to get an ISBN. You can get it from the self-publishing service that you're using, like Amazon's CreateSpace, I think provides an ISBN. But for IngramSpark, I don't believe they provide ISBN, so you need to get your own. So I went digging into information about ISBNs, and I was consulting this blog, which I look at often, called The Book Designer, created by Joel Friedlander, who knows a lot about self-publishing, and he's created a lot of great tutorials and resources. So anyways, I was looking at this tutorial that was talking about how you can get an ISBN from this company called Boker, and you have to purchase it. At the time of him writing it, it was $125 for one ISBN, but if you buy a block of like 10 numbers, then it's only $250. So it's actually cheaper to buy in bulk. So that's probably what I'm going to be doing, purchasing a block in case I want to write more books in the future. Okay, last section. Once you have all the files ready, then you can upload it as a new title within IngramSpark. You need to fill out all this metadata, like the description, keywords, things like that. If you don't know what to fill in there, luckily this guy who wrote the book designer talks about metadata, because the metadata will determine how people are going to find your book on Amazon, like the different categories and things like that. Joel also has a page on the copyright page, because I have no idea what is in that page in the book. And then I think once all of it is uploaded and everything, then you just upload your PDFs. I was going to order a couple just so that I could check the formatting, of course. And then if I need to change anything, then I'll just upload new PDFs and then print it again. Once the book is done, then that's where the real work begins in terms of like marketing and getting the book out there. One suggestion that I heard about is that you can set your public release date some amount of time in the future. And then in the meantime, you can pass out like almost ready versions of your book to people, and those are called ARCs, advanced reader copies. So these people know that, you know, it's not the final version, but it's like good enough to like give them an idea of what the book is about, and then they can write reviews on it. You know, they can give it to book reviewers or I don't know, bloggers, so that when people go to buy it on your actual launch day, that there could be reviews already. So yeah, that is basically the process in a nutshell. And that was a big nutshell. I'm sorry. I don't even know if anyone's around still, if you've fallen asleep or like close the browser window, but that was a really long video. If this video was helpful, leave a thumbs up, subscribe to follow along, and I'll continue to share my journey. Right now, I'm in the midst of wrangling with Adobe Illustrator because it's a new tool and there's just so many options and kind of getting lost in all of it. But I will prevail. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Phew. That was a lot of information and it almost felt like an Android coding tutorial.